Hello and welcome to the Bald and Bloviating podcast. I'm your very bald host, Mookie Spitz, and I'm bloviating with Mr. Ed Powell. Welcome back to the pod.
Thank you, sir.
Ed is my legacy MAGA representative, ambassador, spokesperson, translator. I've had you on the pod now, I believe, 2 times, and we've sparred a little bit. We've agreed on certain issues, and we're at the 1-year mark. We're just after January 20th, 2026 of the second Trump administration, and I am eager and excited to hear what you think about it. And to give our listeners and viewers just a little bit of context, Ed, I like to think of you as MAGA before MAGA was cool, but you qualify that in ways that go beyond just Trump rolling down the escalator with Melania and owning the universe. I think your point of view has been much more nuanced. So I'll let you open it with that and tell us a little bit about how you got on the Trump train and where you're at between that point of hopefulness of this worldview and its fruition in the second term so far.
Yeah, I mean, when he came down the elevator in 2015, I was appalled, obviously. I thought that was the most ridiculous thing, Donald Trump running for president. I was always very much a constitutional conservative, kind of libertarian, and my guy in the primaries in 2016 was Ted Cruz, who has, by the way, turned out to be a complete disappointment over the years. So I'm glad he didn't get elected. It wasn't until September of 2016 that he had sealed the nomination. He had been attacked for all sorts of spurious reasons, and it wasn't then that I really looked into certain elements of his, for instance, trade policy, and realized that he might actually have a point there. And so with that kind of out of the way, I've always been against mass migration. I think we should take the best of the best and not the worst of the worst. And so that resonated with me, and so I came on board very, very late in the campaign in 2016, and of course, Trump aggravates me, as I'm sure he aggravates you. Although he's not bald, but he is bloviating, right? So it's and I mentioned this the last time I was on, but I know people who are so viciously anti-Trump, and when you get right down to it, it's very aesthetic. They just the aesthetic of Trump, going and bloviating and exaggerating. It just gets on people's nerves. How can this man be president of the United States? It's just crazy. That such a buffoon can represent the United States on the world stage. And I've heard this many, many times from friends, and I do a weekly podcast too with some of my friends, and most of the time it's we bitch and moan about all the terrible things Trump is doing. He doesn't quite live up to sort of the MAGA ideal, right? But last night, in preparation of this podcast, I did some research. I was gonna come in and say, I'm very disappointed in Trump. He's way too out of control, and it's nuts, and he's not really getting any of the things done that I want done. And then I did some research, and I spent 2 hours researching with Google and with Grok and with ChatGPT of sort of the accomplishments. And I came out with sort of 2 or 3 pages of real accomplishments in my view, and about 1 page of disappointments. And so I think that, these are facts. The number one disappointment.
Hold on 1 second.
We'll get into it. Let me finish. His biggest failure is his personality in a lot of ways, and everybody hates. A lot of people hate that, but there are real accomplishments, and I'll be happy to talk about them with you.
Well, that's the point I'm making, and I want to bifurcate there for a second, because you brought up your initial apprehension about this guy, the ridiculousness even of the opening escalator flourish. And then when you got to know his policies, you found alignment, specifically vis-a-vis immigration was a big one.
Yeah.
Right. And trade. And you were on the Trump train at that point, and then he got a chance. He won. And then now we're in round two. So now you're looking at his accomplishments through the lens of policy, not bloviation and not just what's on the surface, but what's actually getting done. And I think this is an important point to make, because I know on the side of the left, there's a tendency to consider this guy so violative and vile that even his demonstrably beneficial impact is just flat out rejected outright. And that's another reason I think that this is a worthwhile exercise here for all potential listeners.
And yesterday afternoon, when I was thinking about today, I was that way too. Did the research, right? I was C minus, right? Now I'm B plus.
All right. So that's intriguing to me, which is, again, why I got you on. And I tend to be a libertarian type as well. In certain areas, I lean further left than you. And in other areas, I think we're very much aligned. And I think that makes this conversation not only friendly, but productive, because I think we can get that objectivity if we can. And if we can keep it fact-based and keep it essentially on point with what goal, resolution, impact, result is like, then I think we can get a much more fair assessment of where we are.
Yeah, I mean, I think in 2016, I was an anti-Trumpist for Trump. And in 2020, I was a pro-Trumpist against Trump in the Senate. No one saying would vote for Biden, but like his management of COVID was so horrific. And not just his, but everybody's, that I wish he would have returned it. And of course, in 2024, I would have crawled over broken glass a la Die Hard to vote for him against Biden or, eventually Harris, because the Biden administration was such a complete disaster. But yeah, I mean, I think there's a number of areas where that I didn't even know. I mean, maybe I knew, but I didn't integrate. Of course, the border,
Before we get into this assessment that you've conducted, let's take a look at the Biden administration with as much objectivity as we can, because we need a benchmark for this conversation to hit home and be meaningfully. And let's take it one issue at a time. Let's start with the border. So the border was a mess. Millions of folks came in. Between 10 and 20 million people came in, and they all went on welfare. Not a single one of them has a productive job. Well, let's time out with let's try to avoid hyperbolics and superlatives, because it does destroy credibility, in all fairness. When you make a blanket statement that as many as 20 million people came across the border and each and every one of them is on welfare, you're destroying credibility, in all fairness. So let's try to avoid, for the sake of keeping this conversation as objective as we can, blanket politicized statements like that, if we can avoid them, because I want your point of view to come across as credible as possible to people who would ostensibly reject it. That's my mission here. But you and I, being upper middle class white guys, we deal with immigrants all the time. And the immigrants we deal with are always highly productive, good guys, whether they're doing landscaping or whether they're fixing my house or plumber or whatever, they're all credits to. And many own businesses. Let's elevate that as I mentioned, when I went to a seminar before I started my business, and I was the only white person in the room, right? There's all these people, all these immigrants starting business. But this was before the Biden surge, right? This is not
this is previous to the Biden surge, and the Biden surge was so disruptive to everything, to the economy, house prices. I mean, I may have mentioned that it takes 4 years, and it takes 4 hours to buy someone from the border to anywhere else in the United States. So it's what that does is drive up house prices, or make the aliens end up sleeping illegally, right? In our county, you're only allowed to have 4 unrelated people in a house, right? But of course, they violate that all the time, and that rule isn't enforced. So there's all sorts of crushing. Now for me, I own my own home, and so it's gone up a couple $100,000, but yeah, that's not good for Americans. That's not good for young Americans who've worked hard and whatnot. So I mean, that the housing is the most obvious. The job situation is obviously a serious problem, because they especially the illegal aliens drive down wages for the lowest the lowest earning workers, a lot of whom are legal Hispanic immigrants and Black Americans. So I mean,
there's a point of view, and I just want to put a pin in this too, that we hear this all the time, that undocumented migrants take jobs that Americans don't want. So with that, there's a sweeping generalization that it doesn't even matter how many come across the border. And actually, we should encourage more migration, because these jobs need to be filled, and they can't be filled by folks already here and already here legally.
I mean, that's of course complete nonsense. I mean, it's the first month of Econ 101 in college. If you increase the supply drastically, the price of this will go down drastically. I mean, that's just like first month in econ. So and what it does is drive down wages. Of course, they try and fix that by driving up minimum wage, but that just means everybody's off books, right? So that's the primary problem, I think, with it, with economically. Now, the real issue is not so much the economic problems that mass migration causes; it's the cultural problems. I think there's a very good article by Borrica Gato, El Gato Malo, just the other day, and the x-axis is sort of Western cultural values, and there's a distribution of people, Westerners, who are pretty high in the Western cultural values, and then there's everybody else, which goes from 0 and to some, and like the ones at the top, are good immigrants if they embrace Western cultural values, and we know people who are like that. I know some personally who are very much like that. But then you get the Somalis, which are way the hell on the left end of the curve.
Well, once again, you got big generalizations, and I'm on your side here with Ed, trying to avoid broad stroke generalizations about.
This is not a broad stroke generalization. This is math, dude. This is math. There, I mean, there might be a few.
I am certain that there are legal Somali emigres, grew up in Moga frickin' Dishu, who are great Americans, maybe even run businesses, and are just stellar citizens. Now,
I know one. I am Hercule.
Point to them being relatively rare. Okay,
that's what I just said.
But yeah,
relatively
when
rare.
you make, I'm on your side here, and I want to help this conversation. When you make broad strokes generalizations, which fuels the political fire on both sides, that when we say Somalis, or when we say a category of human by segment or any description, and you just dismiss them or make a claim comprehensively about these people, you're undercutting the efficacy of your factualized, evidence-based point of view.
Well, I mean, I can't go into every I can't go into the math, but I will just assert plainly, which you can look up, is the average IQ in Somalia is 68. And the lowest, let me just listen to me for a second. The lowest IQ that you can have for a productive job in the United States in a high-tech information society is 85. So you can do the integral and find out what of Somalis, and it's 70 is considered learning disabled. So like more than half of the Somalis would not even qualify as.
I don't know where you're getting the stat, and the whole notion of IQ as an indicator is sketchy.
Oh, I don't think that at all. IQ is determinative of 80% of the.
You're jumping into these generalizations that ethnicities, in broad strokes, have variability based on overall intelligence.
That's just fairly true. I mean, all the data shows
that's contested. All right. Once again, I don't want to go into too much detail, and I don't want to push back too much because I really want your opinion. But I'm trying to keep this conversation on the level so that we're not making contested generalizations about the nature of our species, and keep us on point for effective policy.
Well, effective policy basically is keeping the West Western, right? There are certain Western cultural values that that define the United States. And I'll give you a broad generalization here. While people think of the United States as a melting pot, that's only true when it comes to like food and stuff. That's not true at all. Assimilation in the United States is basically getting someone to throw away most of their sort of deeply held cultural values from where they come from. And this doesn't have to be like, Somalia. It could be Germany or Poland or Norway or whatever, and adopt kind of an Anglo-Saxon view towards a number of very fundamental interpersonal relations. Like you solve interpersonal conflict by talking or by going through a legal process. You do not abuse your wife or children. Now, I know there are plenty of Americans who abuse their wife and children, but that is not part of the Anglo-Saxon tradition. You help in your neighborhood. You don't like just demand things from the government. You volunteer. You help out. You treat everyone equally until they prove themselves to be jerks or something. You don't have ethnic priorities, right? You don't, if you meet someone from a different ethnicity, you treat them, at least at first, as another human being and citizen, and you don't have ethnic favoritism. Those are all parts of the Anglo-Saxon cultural traditions. Now, that's really deep. That's really, you educate girls. You don't put them in trash bags, things like that,
or give them a clitorectomy, and
yes,
then and also in terms of business. So the idea of innate systemic corruption, and fraud.
The Anglo-Saxon tradition is anti-fraud. It is.
And I think that's very, very significant. So if we're
if you take all of these cultural values
and facts,
obviously you have to make broad generalizations, but the number of murders in England in 1900 was like 6, something like that. There's nobody murdered anybody. And I think that, in the United States, it was worse a little bit, but not so bad. So it's these sort of Anglo-Saxon cultural values. Now, your family came from Hungary and Romania, and Hungary and Romania are fine countries, I'm sure, but they didn't have, but you've pretty much been anglicized over the years. I mean, if you get into a fight with someone, an argument with someone, you don't haul off and whack them. You don't drink too much or smoke too much or whatever, and you behave like a civilized human being. And that's kind of what it's not really melting, right? We are not, when we bring in immigrants, we don't like, oh, this is a society based on familial, tribal, ethnic ties, like the mafia was. When we see, this used to be the case. When we see these sort of ethnic, tribal, family criminal organizations like the mafia, they're white, by the way. So this is not a racial thing. What we do, or what we used to do, is crush them, absolutely crush them, because that is not the Anglo-Saxon tradition. It didn't melt. We didn't all like, oh, we'll go halfway towards the mafia. We'll be,
that took some time. It took some time, and it took Rico. It took Rico, right?
Yeah, it took some time, but it also was our American society being confident in our cultural values enough to crush this this ethno-tribal criminal type of enterprise, and so that's what I mean. That's what I mean when I say it's not a melting pot. It's not a salad, which is what it is now. It's a transformation, maybe over a couple generations. Thomas Sowell has a great book on this, by the way. From being to being what America is, and there, as I said yesterday on the podcast, there's probably 300 million Chinese who would be perfectly happy to come to the United States and be extremely productive and an economic engine. And I don't want them to come, because then the United States would become China. You see, maybe 300,000, but there's a certain sort of limiting capacity of the assimilation. And there's probably 200 million Indians who would make perfectly good Americans. I don't want them here either. 200,000 again, maybe, but 200 million, we could have 200 million Indians and 300 million Chinese, and it would not be America.
The traditional liberal perspective and counterpoint to this idea that we are not a melting pot and there needs to be a period of assimilation to Americanize immigrants is that we are the converse of that, bring us, you're tired, you're poor, that we welcome everyone, and that one of America's greatest strengths, not weaknesses, is the infusion of all of these emigres. There are different cultures, there are different ways of thinking, there are different sauces and flavors and ideas, and that's what makes us great. Now, there's clearly in my bald head a balance between these two. On the one hand, I think it's incontrovertible that a lot of our strength does come from the diversity of our population. At the same time, it's also clear that there is an American culture, which is different from the culture of other countries. And many of the aspects that you describe of Western values and Anglo-Saxon values have been a stabilizing force here in the States, namely allergy to corruption, allergy to systemic tribalism, and allergy to values that we would consider antithetical to what we're familiar with.
Yeah, I mean, when people talk about cultures, they tend to think of the beautiful Indian dresses that they wear at the weddings, or the fact that they have all these restaurants. They can get Thai food and curry and Vietnamese food and Chinese food, all of that, and those are utterly and totally trivial, and I don't care. That's fine. The great, but it's the interpersonal relationship values, how you treat women, how you treat family members, how you treat strangers, right? The how you treat strangers aspect is very deeply, deeply Christian. And so when you get large non-Christian populations, which they're seeing in Europe, especially with Muslim populations, and their interpersonal relations, the way they treat women, the way they treat their family members, the way they treat foreign girls or British girls, because it's so anathema. And the British government, is the worst government in the world. We should not take out Maduro. We should go and take out Keir Starmer. But if we're going to kidnap people, start with Mark Carney, Keir Starmer, and Macron. Anyway, the ingrained Christian values and of how interpersonal relations are the exact opposite of the ingrained personal values in Islam. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't essentially, Muslims who have basically rejected the fundamentals of the Sharia law and are perfectly willing to live under sort of an Anglo-Saxon viewpoint. My next door neighbor is one. It's fine, but like when you get these large ethnic enclaves like they have in Britain, and you don't have the civilizational confidence like we did when we crushed the mafia to go and crush these these people who are not assimilating, then basically you lose your country, and that's what happened. That's what's happening in England and Germany and France. So I just don't want that to happen in the United States. I mean, that's kind of we're talking a long term about this. Of course, immigration is only one of Trump's accomplishments. There are a bunch of others.
Just level setting at some of the problems that ostensibly Trump and the vision and the policy is trying to address, and according to you, is getting a B+ for addressing some of these. Now, I just want to, for a second, counterpoint on a few things. So, you're looking at civilization hierarchically, okay? So the Anglo-Saxon, ultimately Calvinist vision that created the United States, you're putting at top. And at the bottom, you're putting others. And the basis of that evaluation has to do with values, culture, ways of living. And you're pointing to a deficiency in the other cultures and an inherent superiority in ours.
Now, I'm not so sure I'm saying that. I don't want the Chinese necessarily to overthrow 4,000 or 5,000 years of Chinese culture and adopt the Anglo-Saxon culture. And I don't particularly think that the Muslim countries should necessarily throw away, 1,600 years of Muslim culture. And I don't think the Indians should throw away 5,000 years of Indian culture. That's fine. Just do it in India, do it in China, do it in Saudi Arabia. Well, just don't do it in the United States.
I got you, but there's, the philosophy person in me and the debater and the logician is finding a contradiction in what you're saying. You're trying to rationalize your point of view from the basis of behaviors that are demonstrably considered bad as opposed to good. So the foundation for your point of view of exclusivity, of superiority, is one of this valuation. But now you're saying that it's relativistic. That
I'm not saying it's relativistic. Obviously, this Anglo-Saxon culture is far superior to the others. But that does not mean that I am a cultural imperialist. I'm not a cultural imperialist.
Why is it superior?
Well, I think I went into all of that. It has to do with interpersonal relations. It's, do you treat women as human beings or do you treat women as property? Do you have 4 wives or 1? Do you rape kids who are not like you? Do you forbid sex with women and punish it so much that you end up raping young boys? You saw that happening.
Yeah, I understand that, but hold on one second, and I don't want to.
I'm saying rape is bad.
I'm with you, but I don't want to do a whataboutism. But we look at the Catholic.
I'm just telling you the truth.
I got you, but hang on for a second. We got the Catholic Church here in Anglo-Saxon superior America, and they got that issue. We've got,
and they were crushed.
Huh?
And the Catholic Church was crushed, like as they deserved.
It took quite some time.
Yes, it did, but like the mafia. But it's not like it's. We recognize that that's wrong. Oh, and by the way, for all the talk of the Catholic priest abuse scandal, there are these people who are abusers all over the country in any culture and
every culture.
Right. But the difference is is the culture strong enough? Does it have enough civilizational confidence that when it encounters this thing, it destroys it? And I think, I think we are much more willing to destroy alien cultural practices when it happens, like with the mafia or with the Catholic Church. When it comes to sexual abuse of minors, the rate at which sexual abuse of minors occurs in the public school system, that's much larger than the Catholic Church, but I'm talking about the rate per capita, as it were, for those of our listeners, is much greater in the public school system than it is in the Catholic Church. Now, the Catholic Church got in trouble primarily because they hid it. They covered it up. And of course, the public school system covers it. To talk about it, right? Occasionally it'll come out in some news article and everybody goes, wow, that teacher is having sex with her student. But like the systematic study of, the public schools, it is never really been done. So, there are, again, it's, will we punish crimes of this interpersonal nature, like sexual crimes or beatings of wives and children, far beyond the, smack on the butt, like real beatings. And, I got a, part of our new kitchen was done by, I had the quartz countertops done by this local business. They were great, by the way. But funnily enough, they're all Mongolians. They're great. They're all Mongolians.
I met
Mongolians. There's not a damn white person in that. No whites, no blacks, no Chinese. All Mongolians.
I got to know Mongolians in.
They're fine people.
So
they're fine people. But see, you see how it's
interesting. Very interesting.
But it's all very. It's an ethnic enclave. They've got this business. Everybody expects the Chinese to run the Chinese restaurants. They don't, by the way. It's all free. But it's funny. We allow little bits of this ethnic favoritism, but when it becomes large or when it becomes criminal, then we tend, again, not during Obama and Biden, but we tend to crack down on it severely, and that shows a little bit of civilizational confidence that keeps this sort of ethnic favoritism down to a very, very small level. Nobody complains about Chinatown. We all love Chinatown, whether it's in DC or New York or, Koreatown in Los Angeles. Nobody complains about that. That's fantastic. That really helps America. But there's a difference between 1 square mile of, 10 square blocks really of Koreatown in downtown Los Angeles and hundreds of square miles, which is essentially Mexico in the southwestern United States. So there is a difference, and it's a quantity difference. And that's why I'm against mass migration, not against immigration in a limited sense where we pick the best and the brightest. And I think that's Trump's view. So I'm totally on board.
All right. So we can keep going back and forth with the minutia. So starting with immigration and the border. You and I, at least, are aligned that under Biden, it was a catastrophe to the point there was no one even in charge. And this has been documented. The New York Times had a expose, libtard ground zero. They had an expose of the absolute dysfunction throughout the Biden administration regarding immigration. Biden himself couldn't even talk about it when he was coherent for about the hour and a half of any given day. They bring it up, and he didn't even want to talk about it. So we went from chaos to a border with record low levels of crossings and record low instability and record low crime along the border.
One of the things that I think, the left, our buddies, talk about a lot. Because
I'm wearing blue for you, Ed.
Yeah, I'm wearing my Stick It to the Man t-shirt. Of course, it's reversed, but you get the idea. during the Obama administration, late, because Obama switched on it. He was very good on immigration until 2014, and then he switched the last 2 years. And then during the Biden administration, they had this policy of non-separation of children from parents, right? And so what that meant was that if you crossed the border illegally and you had a child with you, that's a kind of a get in to the United States free card. Now, you've now created these cards which say get into the United States free. They happen to be this child that you're with. And so there was a market for children. And large numbers of children were trafficked across the border. And of course, the Trump administration started, the first Trump administration started DNA testing. That got thrown out in Biden too. So basically, so far in the Trump administration, 129,000 trafficked children have been covered and to as much as possible reunited with their real family. Now, those real families are not in the United States. Sometimes they are, but just think about that. Just, okay, yeah, 10 to 20 million people cross the border, but they found, there might be many more, but they found 129,000 missing kids from this immigration disaster in Biden. I mean, if that isn't the most, again, that's Anglo-Saxon, right? That's it. I mean, if you're not appalled by the fact that there were 129,000, at least 129,000 kids trafficked during the border crisis that Biden and Mayorkas were in charge of, if that doesn't horrify you to the depths of your soul, then you have no soul. And like, if I go, if you have two kids, but if you go rob a bank, you're separated from those children, right? That is what happens. You will be separated. You will go to jail, and the children will children are of age, but if they were younger, they'd be put in foster care. So, I mean, the idea that we're separating children is ridiculous. I mean, we always separate criminals from their children. That's the thing. And, again, if we're deporting the mother, the child is not prevented from going with her, so it's the whole thing is just made up. And what it causes is this human trafficking disaster, which, again, it's one thing for a family, to cross the border illegally. They should be given respect but sent home. But it's another for someone, they all pay the narco terrorists that control the Mexican side of the border thousands of dollars per person. But it's one thing for that to happen. It's another thing for some poor Guatemalan mother with 6 kids to lend one of her to some crazy, person. The child's raped a bunch of times along the way, and then is used as a ticket into the United States and immediately sold to some ethnic gang for the sexual pleasure of deviance. It's really disgusting, and that's. I think Biden and Mayorkas should go to jail over that. I think it's the most disgusting thing I've ever heard of in entire history.
Let's look at this again with a little bit of objectivity, and I think the point that you're making, all the minutia aside and all the horror aside, is that the implications of failed border policy are under considered or not considered at all by the left. And this has been endemic for years and is
I don't
central.
think it's considered by the right. The right, there's the right and the right. There's the rhinos in Congress. They're controlled by the Chamber of Commerce, and they want cheap labor. All of these illegal Indian, truck drivers with the commercial driver's license with no name on them, issued by some of these blue states. A couple of really bad accidents have happened, but it's, why is it Indians? Why isn't like because there's this ethnic solidarity that's going on. It's like you have this company.
Ed, I want to moderate this conversation just a little bit, because I say something and you immediately ricochet and you go tangential and you bring up what's up. I'm in all fairness,
tell me what you want to talk about.
I'm trying to keep us just a little on point because I want your points to resonate. So where I was going with that is that there's implications of poor or bad border policy. And we could go into the minutia of Indian truck drivers and trafficked children, but what I'm trying to communicate is that this has been neglected or completely ignored on the part, especially of the left. You bring up a good point. The Republicans are opportunistic when it comes to certain aspects of this too. But as far as the pushback from the left on what's considered draconian border policy is centered around this reality, this demonstrable reality that they're closing their eyes and they don't give a shit about the implications. All they think about are poor immigrants needing a home and a second chance, and our responsibility as Americans, ostensibly, to open our arms and welcome everyone in because we're a better country for it. And I'm essentially agreeing with you that the results have been cataclysmic.
Yeah, I mean,
again, so I'm with you.
Emma Goldman was
with you here and I think it's important. Let's try not to dive into these overly politicized rabbit holes of horrific detail. I get it, but I'm trying to keep us on point so that people listening at least have a chance to hear what you're trying to say.
Well, I think we've beaten the border security to death. I think we should talk about
all right.
some of the other.
So just again, to summarize, especially late in Obama's second term, it got very lax, and that dovetailed into Biden, who was asleep at the wheel in almost every area, especially the border. And it was a reverse. It was a reaction to Trump's actions. If there was a conception of separating kids, we're just going to, keep them together. That precipitated secondary effects like what you described. And there were literally, at the very least, 10 million people who came across the border, illegal. We didn't mention asylum policy, which is a disaster. You just say, I need asylum, and you're allowed to stay in the United States. You're just let in with an ambiguous or protracted court date in 2032. And here you are. They're just come on in, right?
Yeah, I mean, the asylum policy is just one of the many things that, I think it's important to understand many of the immigrants themselves are victims. Many of the illegals are victims, and they're victims of these NGOs who, UN, but not just the UN, the plenty of NGOs that go throughout the world, really, Central America, and they just tell them what to say. Say, I'm being discriminated against because of my race or religion, or something like that. So that when they get to the asylum, and this has all been documented. My friend Lawrence Southern did a whole document.
You don't need to convince me, and arguably most listeners, that the asylum policy is a disaster and needs to change. So we're pretty much aligned on border, and actually most Democrats have finally smelled the coffee because they've flipped their messaging already, given the success of what's happened at the border, given the needs and the problems that we've covered. So of all Trump areas of transformation, the border arguably is the least contentious, although you do have the flare-ups here and there of the child separation, and the left is going to nitpick and try to find issues, but they're backfiring. Most Americans are like, finally, at least it's under control. So there you go. What do you give Trump as far as the border goes in your assessment 1 year in?
Well, I'd give him an A on the border, basically. We had net.
I would too. Here I am in blue, and I would give Donald J. Trump 2.0. You would say 3.0, 2.0, and an A on the border.
For the last year, we had net out-migration for the first time. I think that's important. What's funny is Mark Carney was elected to Canada, Liberal, banker. Canada had net out-migration last year after like over 2 million for 3 consecutive years. So Carney is it's couldn't be more leftist, and he realized that Canada is in much worse shape than the United States. It's harder to assimilate in Canada than it is the United States, and proportionally they had far more immigration than we did. But he's gone to net zero migration. It's very interesting. I think his second, I think the second thing that I would give him an A on is the economy and jobs. I think the GDP is way up this year. Inflation is down. All the stupid things like egg prices, well, they're back to normal. Trump is responsible for the inflation that we got in the Biden administration, partially anyway, because of his COVID money creation. But
it was exacerbated by Biden.
Yeah, I think it was like 1.5 trillion worth of money printing in Trump 1.0 and like 4.5 trillion in Biden. So again, he bears like 25% of the responsibility, but even more than that because he started it, right? It's the person who starts it that bears a lot of responsibility, and that's one why I was so, pro-Trumpist, anti-Trump kind of in the 2020 election, because that was,
let's really factor in the economy is contentious. You give him an A, and I would argue that at this point most Americans would not. So when it comes to the cost of basic goods, they're still going up. They're not coming down. You could argue rate of inflation. Most certainly that's come down. But right. This affordability issue is significant. There's two factors too that are on a macro scale. On the one is the tariffs, of which I believe about $200 billion has already come into our coffers. But it seems to be mostly out of the pockets of American businesses, this $200 billion. It's essentially taxation through trade. And that's had its own impact. That's number one. And let me finish.
It does have an impact.
Let me finish, and I'll give it to you. The other one is the AI boom. Data centers, investor capital. When you look at the S&P and specifically NASDAQ, AI and AI investment is pouring trillions into the economy with minimal expected return in the short to medium future. So we have this weird kind of balancing act from my humble bald-headed point of view, that a lot of Trump's actions, especially the tariffs in terms of their sweeping nature and the magnitude and comprehensibility of the tariffs, is boosting consumer costs. And at the same time, we have trillions pouring into data centers and research in this burgeoning revolutionary technology that frankly is yet to demonstrate any positive ROI whatsoever. So now I will pass the mic back to you.
Yeah, I mean, I just, you said exactly right. There's $200 billion of cost to the economy due to the tariffs. Tariffs are tax, right? And according to what I found out last night, there's been $9.6 trillion in foreign or domestic commitments to build factories in the United States. Again,
no arguments there. We're at commitments.
Right, we're commitments.
Everyone wants to kiss this guy's ass because that's smart, but it's a step in the right direction.
I went to the NVIDIA GTC in Washington, D.C. a couple of months ago, and Jensen Huang, who is, is born in Taiwan but grew up in Kentucky and is a really funny guy. He gave his hour and a half long, what's going on in the AI, in NVIDIA. And I have never, ever in my entire life, including Trump, heard a more pro-American talk than that. That was just, it was off the charts.
That's a no-brainer coming from Jensen. He's got to grease the wheels
Of course, but he thinks he's talking.
Zelensky just chastised the Europeans to smoke some Don Pol. Just happened.
We can talk about failures, and Ukraine is one of the failures later. But I do think, it's not like 195 billion cost was counteracted by 9.6 trillion in investment. It's 9.6 trillion in promises, but it's way more than 195 billion in cost. So there's a restructuring of the economy, right? And that's unfortunate. Now, one of the things that Trump has done, and he really has done this, again, I've looked through, I can't read them all, but with slashing some of the regulations, especially the Green New Deal regulations, which really handicapped production and manufacturing in the United States, he has set the path for a lot more production, which means more jobs and higher wages for workers in this next second year. Kind of what Reagan did. I don't know what you remember, but in Reagan was elected in 1980, and 1981 and 1982 were one of the worst recessions.
I was in high school.
One of the worst recessions the United States has had, the worst since the Great Depression, really. And but he set the table by slashing regulations, especially on energy, which is exactly what Trump is doing, for morning in America in 1984. So I think I'm very positive on the actions he's done. I know that, with the exception of eggs and some meat and stuff, eggs because they killed all the chickens, and meat because they introduced all these idiotic Green New Deal regulations on meat production. Those things are slowly coming down. I notice it I don't eat a whole lot of red meat, but we buy red meat to feed to the cats. And I've noticed that the prices have stabilized and gone down a little bit. So I'm very happy about that. But getting a lot of these restrictions on energy gone is very, very important to set things up for the future. Now, again, you don't necessarily see everything in 25, but I think those are really important. As far as trade, as far as the tariffs are concerned, yes, that's a tax. It's paid by American businesses and American consumers. That's just basic economics. The weird thing, though, is at the end of World War II, the United States is the only manufacturing power in the world. Everybody else has been devastated by the war. So the United States put into a policy to give away our manufacturing capabilities to the Germans, the English, the French, the Canadians, and the Japanese. We agreed to non-reciprocal trade policies to bring their economies back up.
Factually, incontrovertibly correct. Right.
But it's been 80 years, man. It's time to move out of their mother's basement. So I think, the tariffs worldwide, under GATT and now the WTO, the tariffs have been coming down, but the non-tariff barriers have still been in place. And I think what Trump did was to say, okay, we're going to take both the tariffs that you charge, which were higher than the United States. It's even under the WTO, they're still higher. So our average tariff was 2.5%, and the rest of the world is 4%. It's something.
That again is categorically correct. These are just facts.
Yeah. And but it was the non-tariff barriers. I mean, I follow a lot of people on Instagram, and the first thing that English tourists do when they get to the United States is, they come with their giant empty suitcase and they go immediately to Target and buy a whole lot of stuff because it's so much more expensive in England or France or wherever they're coming from. So we do benefit from this in a certain way, but from the jobs perspective, we just exported all that manufacturing. And it really came to a head in 1999, 2000, when we allowed China into the WTO. And they just kicked our ass with regard to manufacturing. Some of it legitimate kicking our ass. And, if they're kicking our ass legitimately, then, but a lot of it illegitimately based on IP theft and basically slave working conditions. So I think that that was really a kind of a mistake. It should have been managed a little more, a little better. So what Trump did was basically say, look, we're going to take the tariff barriers and the non-tariff barriers into account, and had some sort of formula, which is of course nonsense, right? Like all economic formulas. And we're going to
it was beyond nonsensical. I'm aligned with you on all your key points. Yeah. Except in practice, in implementation, the whole idea of reciprocal tariffs, just indiscriminately and often ad hoc, blasted out there. I'm a big fan of the Amazon flywheel. The concept of the Amazon flywheel, and that's when you're building up momentum. You're a physicist, right?
Mm. You're recovering
F equals ma, right? In all of its Newtonian variations. All right, you're building up a lot of momentum, and that just takes volume. If you're running a business, whether it's a lemonade stand or you're Jensen Huang with NVIDIA, you're dealing with economy of scale and you're dealing with efficiencies. You're also a data guy, right? So you understand that data management takes up as much, if not more, energy than the actual inventory and supply chain, which explains why AWS is basically what spearheaded Amazon's success. It's about data. It's about
Walmart's too, by the way.
Yeah. So the flywheel in abstract, generalized concept. When you do something as idiotic, in my opinion, as the reciprocal tariff blanket effect, 10 to 25%, this country, that industry, this industry, you're taking down the overall energy level of global trade, with us being a key partner in that. And to me, that's a weakened position, in principle, bad for us. It could be temporarily bad for Vietnam, okay? But they're already trading with different partners. China had a trade surplus, if you could believe their numbers, of 1.2 trillion. And the tariffs forced them to rechannel their efforts, and it's kept them sprightly and vibrant and flexible, and it's cut us out of the influence and what's been dominion in the world stage. And this has to do with economic policy, and we could talk about foreign policy in a second too. But this is the sensibility that, to me, undercuts this Trumpian vision of control. You got to just let it loose. Milton Friedman, just let it rip, and that'll buoy you up in terms of production, flexibility, scale, engagement.
I partially agree with you. Trump behaved like a bull in a china shop, saying it's 50% tariff. Now it's 100% tariffs. Now it's down to 25% tariffs. Now it's 50 again. Now, that's just crazy. That causes what in economics is called regime uncertainty. And if you have regime uncertainty, what you don't do is invest, because you have no idea what.
No one can plan anything. That's right. The ancillary problem of all this.
And
right?
I think the first few months he was really hampered by this. Now, I am in favor of the reciprocal tariffs, and but I know what he was doing. I mean, I know what he's doing. Who knows? But I know what his domestic advisors were doing. He wanted to do the reciprocal tariffs, and I'm in favor of that. But he was so random and on, up and down and this and, and he was doing it. I mean, if you've ever read Art of the Deal, which is Trump's.
I read that in high school, by the way.
He didn't write it, by the way. Some ghostwriter wrote it.
Yeah, we've heard from him too. And I remember reading it in high school.
But it's the same thing, not to get off the track because we're talking about economics, but it's the same thing as you make this huge demand. We're going to take Greenland, right? And then that just freaks everybody out. And so they come to the table and try and negotiate a smaller settlement. And that's what he was trying to do with the tariffs. It's like, he wants to freak all the people out who have been, who have been hurting American imports to the point where they they can't.
But he also freaked out Wall Street. Clearly, it's rebounded. The one who benefited this are the trading houses, Goldman Sachs. They've all had record returns because buy, sell, short.
Yeah,
short,
do the arbitrage on
sell,
Trump.
buy.
Right.
The sheer volume of transactions
that has calmed down.
Exponentially increased, right?
That has calmed down over the last 6 months. The first 6 months,
bit, and they're getting it. Look what happened with the Greenland, and now we're back. It used to be a cycle of $1 trillion up and down over a few days, and now it's a half trillion in 24 hours.
Now, if I were the president of the United States, and like I said, I'm in favor of reciprocal tariffs. I really am. So I'm totally on board. But what I would have done was publish that chart, maybe a little bit more methodological rigor that goes into it. This is the tariffs. And I say, okay, we're going to impose these tariffs over the next, say, 8 months, 1/8 per month, something like that, something gradual. So instead of going from 50 to 100 to, you would go, suppose the tariff was 15%, or 16% to make it easy. So, 15, I don't know, who knows, but like 3% this month and 3 more next month. And that gives it gives some certainty about where we're going. And we can always stop if we get a trade deal. But, 50, 100, 25, 50, it was just crazy. So I would do it gradually.
This is how I see Trump. I see him like he's eating a well-done steak with ketchup. And that's like his left hand. He's popping Adderall with his right hand. Exactly. He's got Laura Loomer underneath the Resolute desk. All right. He's on the phone with BB and Chi at the same time. And and then he just kind of feels like 100, 150, right? Whatever. Yeah. And he knows that every time he farts, the entire world shudders and gives it a deep,
He's such a narcissist.
He loves it. Whiff. They're all taking it in to figure out what he ate yesterday. That's where we're at with this guy.
Again, it's a very aesthetic thing, and it's a very sort of he is a chaos agent, and I think to a certain extent the U.S. government needs a chaos agent. The U.S. government is so ossified and so completely dysfunctional. I mean, we are to a certain extent a completely failed state. I mean, we're one step away from being Somalia, in my view. But it's so ossified that you have to kind of kick people in the ass, and that's another.
Here, I agree with you. I'm totally aligned with you, and I was thinking too about the Austrian philosopher Paul Feyerabend. He wrote Against Method, where basically he took a Nietzschean view of the scientific method, which is if you're always constrained within the box and you're just following the rules, there's no way to induce paradigm shift. You're just living in it. He was way ahead of Kuhn too. And even Michel Foucault in his analysis, he's more on the left, but his evaluation of crime and punishment, the way a society looks at that. These are disruptive thinkers in the Nietzschean tradition. And the thing that I like the most about Trump is what you bring up. And it's beyond party, it's beyond ideology. It's this idea of just thinking out of the box, being a disruption agent. So we question everything. And there's a price to be had for this, but the overall benefit outweighs that cost, in my estimation.
Again, if he was very handicapped term in the first 3 years, and then COVID ruined. So it was kind of a wash. I think, I really liked the initial Doge finding of waste and corruption in government spending. And I really respected Elon's attack. He's like, see, if you go into the Department of Labor and you say, well, what do you spend money on? And what do you do? They'll give you, say, come back in 3 months, we'll give you a briefing on what we do and everything. And so, of course, they won't do anything. So Elon said, screw that. I'm going to the Treasury and find out where the money's going. And that was just brilliant. It's like, what do you mean we're spending money here? And you got these 20-year-olds who just can, hack into the system and find out that,
Yeah,
We're
where's all
spending
that data? I'm wondering. It got
$10 million
It's
on
got Starlinked up everything.
us.
All the info is Starlinked up.
It was so epic. Now, of course, it has calmed down due to the spat that Elon and Trump had over the one big beautiful bill,
And
but
also
it's still
The
working.
NASA guy. That's
Yeah.
what triggered it, right?
Well, I happen to be
Isaacson. Yeah.
Jared Isaacman. I happen to be a big fan of Jared
I
Isaacman.
like him too. I think he's
And
great.
he was derailed initially, I think, because again, Ted Cruz. I'm so embarrassed to have supported him. Didn't like the fact that he wanted to think outside the box and go away from the big defense contractors who
Look at
just,
the Artemis mission is ridiculous.
it's ridiculous.
A non-reusable billion-dollar launch vehicle in 2026. Are they serious about this?
A lot of jobs in Alabama, man. A lot of jobs in
I
Alabama.
mean, what the actual F with Artemis? The whole program makes no sense.
Yeah, no, it's a complete disaster. So
why
I
isn't there a reactor on the moon yet?
Well, there's going to be a big Blue Origin lander coming up in the next couple of months, like bigger than the LEM. So it's that'll be cool. I like Blue Origin too. I mean, I'm not as big a Bezos fan as I am an Elon fan, but like the Blue Origin is doing good work too, and I think between the two of them, Lockheed and Boeing are done. It's just they're dead men walking.
There's no disagreement there, but on the one hand, the chainsaw that Elon was advocating to indiscriminately just kind of hack through government. Again, the libertarian is me is just just go for it. I mean, a part of me is just like, I don't even know what kind of government we essentially need, except for making sure that the traffic lights are working, and just keep it pretty basic. So
the really interesting thing is there's this guy on Twitter who's named Mike Benz. He's very much a free speech advocate, and so he started out trying to figure out, what are all the government agencies that engage in censorship, but then he dove deep into like the CIA. Because the CIA and the State Department were kind of behind all the censorship, and he was the one who sort of discovered that when the CIA doesn't want to be responsible for dirty tricks, it calls on USAID and the National Endowment for Democracy. And I think the destruction of USAID was fantastic. Unfortunately, the way the National Endowment for Democracy is structured, it's brilliantly structured. It's also a censorship and political meddling. It meddles in other people's elections and things. It's a really evil agency, but it's divided into 4 parts. The first part goes to Republican think tanks, the second to Democratic think tanks, the third to like business interest think tanks, and the fourth to labor think tanks. So it should be abolished, obviously, because
it's spreading itself kind of thin.
I know,
like my girlfriend in high school.
Yeah, well, it's like. But USAID had been completely taken over by the Biden people, and they were doing trying to teach Nigerians how to be accepted of LGBTQ. It's
for our listeners who are getting triggered, is this idea that the USA has had soft power since World War II. I think it's one of those axioms which need to be deconstructed along the lines of what we're harping about, right? And that goes to NATO too. The fact that we're paying their way, the fact that we need this hedge, the fact that the post-World War II reality, to your point earlier, we're 80 years plus away. What is the fundamental point? You hear folks just saying these statements that are like Kant's categorical imperative, right? It's just the way it is. And you got a maniac like Trump who's just knocking over the chessboard because, he's high on his own bullshit. That there's deeper thinking here. There's a realignment that's going on. And it might seem scattered and confusing, and it often is. And Trump tends to be an ADHD, Adderall popping, Laura Loomer banging, well done
Laura
steak
Loomer. I met Laura
with
Loomer at the inauguration. I met Laura Loomer at the inauguration, and she was like, you're at one of these parties, and you just oh, it's Laura Loomer. I'll go up and say hi. She was a complete. Is this a PG or an R rated podcast?
No, we could. I've already got the explicit rating because we have.
Oh, okay. Well, she was a real bitch. She was not nice at all. I got a picture with her, but like I said, hey, how about a pic? And she like grabbed the phone out of my hand and like, took it, and she was not smiling, and it was just awful. She's just a horrible human being.
I
don't
had the
like her at
same
all.
experience with David Foster Wallace, the writer of Infinite Jest.
Yes. So I just want to, we've been going on for a while. I just want to summarize a couple of things I really like.
A border, and we're both A border. Okay, you give the economy an A.
Yeah, A minus.
I give the economy currently a C with the potential for.
Yeah, where it's like Reagan's first year.
It's a tentative C because it's not done yet. I will acquiesce. Right now, it's a C, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I like the trade policy. I don't like the regime uncertainty. So I would definitely give him a C plus on that. On the government reform side, Doge, again, I C plus on that. I thought they got an A plus at the beginning, but they have fallen off lately. I was so disgusted with Trump's performance during COVID that I really latched on to RFK Jr. In the primaries. If he had won the Democratic primary, I would have voted for him over Trump.
Wow, that's a bold statement.
And if he had, if he had run independently, I would have voted for him as an independent. Again, this is all due to Trump's behavior during COVID. Not again because of I didn't know that all these things would be done. So. I'm really excited with what RFK Jr. is doing with the HHS. Again, totally incomplete. I'd sort of give him a B right now, but like he's doing, I could go through all the things, but like I really think that he's starting to do some good stuff.
I give him an A plus and an F minus, depending on the issue. So I think for me, it's averaging about a C minus so far. Yeah. But it's one extreme or the other. It's like A plus action, reverse the food pyramid, right on. Get rid of the shit in our food, right on. And a lot of the other shenanigans, I'm like, he fired the
entire CDC vaccine advisory board, which was great because they were all owned lock, stock, and barrel by big pharma. You know a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's true. I'm not quite sure if you want to throw out the baby with the measles bathwater, but
the measles vaccine, he did slash the vaccine schedule from like 75 for infants to like 17, which is what the European schedule is. And it's not like the Europeans are dropping dead of the measles. Another chaos agent, which again, to the extent that he's a chaos agent, that's good in certain sense, but bad in others, is Pete Hegseth with the military. I think morale has drastically improved. Lots of enlistments. Nobody was enlisting under Biden, especially because of the COVID vax mandate. More people are enlisting now than we even have room for in our armed forces. That is also really good.
That is also true. And it's very interesting. I did a TikTok video. I rant regularly on TikTok. And I went up there. I go, how does the military feel about being called fat? And how do you feel where you got a Fox News host who's now running the whole show telling you how it's going to be? And 9 of the 10 comments were, you've never really served, have you? And you have no idea what you're talking about in terms of how his message has been received.
Yeah, he was a major in the Army, and you can get to be about, that's an 04, you can get to be about 05 lieutenant colonel without having to, drink the leftist Kool-Aid and become political. Everybody, colonel and generals, they're all political. They're all scheming, they're more interested in their career, but you can actually get to an 05 and be a solid soldier. The fact that he was an 04, I think, is in his in his column of good things, because he served under these political, colonels and generals and whatnot, and he just wants to get rid of them. And I think, there ought, not quite Stalin level bloodbath, but I think there ought to have been a bloodbath among the general officers.
You're not getting much disagreement with me in one area, however. How come Doge didn't Doge the Pentagon?
They tried, and they were told no.
You know, and I don't want to cross paths here. It's in terms of waste, fraud, and abuse. The military-industrial complex. I mean, come on, man.
I agree with you, but what's even worse is the intelligence community. And and again, they, if you think there's waste, fraud, and abuse in the Defense Department, you have seen nothing.
Yeah.
Now, there is some with the intelligence community, especially the CIA, very bloated, NSA, very bloated, spend most of their time spying on Americans and promoting censorship. So, like, I would the crap out of them if I could, focus on our enemies. That's it. And guess what? No Americans are our enemies. But and then they'll do shady things like, okay, yeah, we're not allowed to spy on Americans, but you Brits, you can spy on Americans, and we'll just we'll spy on your people, and you spy on our people, and we'll exchange notes. It's very corrupt. It's the whole thing.
Well, let's focus on foreign policy related to military use. I think that's a good segue. And
sure.
And let's zero in on the Maduro abduction as kind of an apex, if you will, of the military being at its prime. Looks like it was the most amazing operation that I could think of in memory.
And the Iranian strike was also amazing.
Yeah, coupled with the intelligence that facilitated that. And the implications for American power and for Trump waving his stick against the Europeans and just kind of having his way of things.
Yeah. Well, Keir Starmer is next in my view. Okay, so I'm going to give you a little bit of background. The international treaties say that we get exclusive economic use out to like 200 miles, but if we're close to someone, then it's sort of split in half or whatever. You know what I mean? And that's the exclusive economic zone. And of course, if you look at the South China Sea, there's no China there. It's all the Philippines and Malaysia and Brunei and Vietnam. And so what China did was they went and built islands, and they say, hey, this is part of China. Now we get 200 miles around there. And the problem is, because they were little military bases, we couldn't, necessarily attack them. Because that would start a war. So it's just kind of a fait accompli. Next thing they did was signed a treaty, a self-protection treaty that based Chinese soldiers in the Solomon Islands and Guadalcanal. And, you probably know about this. There's so much blood in Guadalcanal, so much American blood in Guadalcanal. And now to see the Chinese controlling Henderson Field, that's kind of a wake-up call to us. So then there was the two Chinese companies most controlled by the CCP and the PLA, who controlled both ends of the Panama Canal. That was we all knew that they were there to make money and to be able to disable the canal in the event of a war. Now, the canal is absolutely crucial for American power, with shifting things from the Pacific. And so when Trump came in, he basically told the Panamanians, okay, that's enough, they're out. And the Panamanians said, okay, that's fine, we'll get them out. And see, we can push around the Panamanians. We can't quite push around the Solomon Islands. Again, if I were president, I would go to the Solomon Islands and say, hey, look, you're an independent country. You can do whatever you want. But if one American soldier has to die in the Solomon Islands, you will never get your independence ever again. You will be a colony forever, and we will run your lives into the ground forever. So you make that decision. But you're a free country. You can do what you want. So then we move from Panama to Venezuela. Again, lots of Chinese input, lots of Chinese things. They were supplying oil to Cuba. Cuba's always a pest. There's also a huge Hezbollah presence. Hezbollah never does anything particularly good. So we arranged to snatch Maduro and hopefully deal with the vice president. We don't go full Iraq on them and like fire every government person. We just snatch one guy.
This is the anti-Iraq approach.
Yeah.
I did a rant like this on TikTok too, which is if you look at the playbook, the de-Baathification, right, of Iraq, this is the opposite of it, which is it's like we would take out Saddam Hussein and then leave the rest of them there, all the Sunnis, to do whatever they need to basically preclude the civil war that actually rolled out in Iraq. So the benefit is clear to us. It's more questionable about the idea of just rejecting regime change outright for the Venezuelan people who really want change. And now we're basically conciliatory to their legacy leadership as long as they behave in our interest.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's a very sort of pro-American policy. And of course, the next step on this Chinese influence thing is Greenland. We have a treaty with Greenland or with Denmark saying we can have certain bases and whatnot in it, but it didn't quite give us what we wanted. And what's said in all of the Greenland things, which seems to be working out, is like being autonomous. If the Chinese approached them and said, "Hey, we want to build a new port in Nuuk, is their capital, and we'll run the port, and it'll be cheap, and it'll be great, and you'll make a lot of money, and it will really help." We don't trust. We, meaning the American foreign policy establishment, does not trust either the Greenlanders or the Danes to say no, and that can't happen. And so, yes, we want more bases to base airplanes and any aircraft and any missile things, and we want less interference by the 57,000 Greenlanders. And yes, we want exclusive control over critical resources, whether it be mining or control the ports or airfields or whatever. We want. It's too important for the United States. The Arctic is becoming too important to the United States. It's the same with Venezuela. It's the same with the Solomon Islands, same with Panama. It's like, I think Trump was like, yeah, we're going to take Greenland. He did it in the first term and nothing ever came for it. But like, Trump wants it for the wrong reasons. Trump wants it for his legacy. He wants to be the guy who like brought in Alaska, or did Jefferson with the elite
and their rare earths. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah. But he says all that, but like he wants it for narcissistic reasons. But the people who are feeding him this information understand how important it is, especially with Canada being so flaky these days. So it's
well, Canada's flaky to a certain extent because Trump has literally been poking the bear.
Yeah, Trump was totally responsible for Poilievre not.
It could be much more civil and easier going, but here, again, I'm in agreement with you where the Western Hemisphere has been a mess, and it's been a mess to a certain extent because we fucked it up. I think we should have kept Cuba open. We should have never blockaded them. We should have never fought them. The Bay of Pigs was a calamity, and our policy has been stupid. It should have just been like, "Hey, Fidel, you won. We love your cigars. Here, let's keep the casino under Batista was great. You mind if we make a casino, the Hilton Head Casino in Cuba, and then let's just be cool. You got that, Fidelito?"
Yeah, the Cuban Missile Crisis.
He wouldn't have. The Russians never would have gotten a bridgehead, and the Fidel regime probably wouldn't have lasted a generation because we would have kept it open.
Yeah, I mean, again, the Russians were mad about the missiles in Turkey, and of course we didn't want missiles in Cuba, and then we came to a secret agreement that we would remove the missiles in Turkey, and they would remove the missiles in Cuba. And I think that could have been done beforehand, right? I mean, it didn't have to take DEFCON 1.
But our whole approach to Cuba. But my point, though, is we have fucked up our influence in Latin America. It's partially on us. That said, though, we're dealing with the current situation of the pain in the ass that is both Cuba and most significantly Venezuela. And And at the end of the day, it's like power talks, money talks, and the rest is just bullshit. And Maduro was a piece of shit. And
Yeah,
and the fact is, sometimes the execution is the thing. It's like the
right.
Shakespearean look at military tactics. Had that raid failed and that helicopter that got hit went down, and it would have turned into a Mogadishu, it would have been fucked up. But it worked. It worked.
Yeah.
And all right, what can you say except nice work, Don?
Yeah, I mean,
And
well, it's not so much Don. It's the fact that
well,
the
he
training.
signed the
Yeah. No,
authorization.
he authorized it. And the same thing with the Iran strike. Again, I'm still skeptical. I'm not saying from a military perspective, both were like truly the most amazing operation. From a political historical perspective, I'm not sure what the outcome is going to be. I think it tends not to be wise to do these things in general. But like maybe we have smarter people in charge. I don't know. I kind of like Rubio, to be honest. I think he's doing great. I love JD Vance. I love RFK Jr. I
He's
love
gonna be
Jared Isaacman.
he's gonna be the heir apparent, I bet. It's like
Who, Rubio or Vance?
Vance.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no problem.
yeah. And the one thing that's interesting to me to hearing you now is I sense disappointment in you when some of these machinations, these interventionalist machinations were in play from a MAGA perspective. Like we're
Yeah.
making the same mistakes, we're dipping our toes in the shit again. And now your tone is quite different, which is it's gone from disappointment and disheartenment to yeah, my boy Don is doing pretty good.
Well, I think we should talk about like the absolute worst thing that Trump has done, and that is his slavish devotion to Israel and their war in Gaza. It got to the point um, where he just couldn't take it anymore, and he basically forced Israel to do it. But this war that Israel has started with 6 or 7 countries, invading Lebanon, taking over large parts of the West Bank, basically locking in the Palestinians into these enclaves, bombing Yemen. It's I mean, people throw around the word genocide, I think, too casually, but I can't not say that that's what they're doing. If you look at the UN definition of genocide, his plan, which was said openly by Israeli politicians, although in Hebrew, and you have to go to the translation, his plan is basically depopulate Gaza and depopulate the West Bank. In other words, ethnic cleanse these 2 places, and that's their plan, and that is genocide.
Once again, this to me is so obvious that the complete Israeli annexation of both territories, Gaza and the West Bank, is policy that's playing its out in front of everyone's eyes. So,
and Netanyahu, goes around saying that he totally controls Trump, and Trump will do whatever. He says this openly. I've seen the video. He totally. I mean, he wasn't meant to say it in the video to get out, but like, yeah, he totally controls Trump, and Trump's his bitch, and all that. And like, if I were the American president, I don't care how much I like Israel or the Israeli people or whatever. If somebody like that said that to me, that would be the end of my relationship with that person. And I would call him out saying, no, I am in favor of the United States. You get nothing from now on. Because I really do think Netanyahu is a crazy person. And I like not the political leadership in Israel are controlled, because of this weird coalition thing they have. The Likud is conservative, but they're controlled by these crazy, and I mean crazy, right-wing religious, ultra-Orthodox religious parties who give them the tip
all
over in the Knesset.
categorically true.
And the left wing, of course, the Social Democrats or whatever they are, they control a lot of seats, but they're controlled by the even crazier communist parties who are to the left of them. And so it's like this, it's like a completely impossible
but
system to get
Bibi
middle.
is not crazy. He's just a crass, amoral opportunist. That's it. He's not crazy. He knows exactly what he's doing, and he's smooth as hell. JD Vance learned how to bullshit his way out of a paper bag from BB. I think it's that same smarmy, smooth style, and it's like everyone's being assured while he's fucking you in the ass. It's the same kind of thing.
I am not I'm not pro genocide, but then again, I don't think I'm particularly.
That's the quote of this podcast. I am not pro genocide.
I also don't think it's the business of the United States to go around and solve all the world's problems. With the Tutsis and the Hutus, that was horrible, but what were we going to do? And it's the same thing that.
Well, now you've gotten Bill Clinton off the hook. You've gone from not being pro genocide to giving Bill Clinton.
Well, let's go anti-Bill then with the whole Somalia intervention, which was a disaster, and the Bush intervention in
now the Epstein files.
Well, that's one of the whole failures. We'll get into that in a moment, but I'm not in favor of genocide, but then again, I don't think it's necessarily the United States' business to stop it. On the other hand, it's definitely not our business to support it and fund it. So the whole
that's the best line right there.
Yeah, I mean, and so I really, I know, you're ethnically Jewish and whatnot, but I really think the Israeli project is a disaster. And it's funny. I was talking to my other Jewish friends the other day, and I said, 3,000 years ago, Moses was promised by God a promised land, and around 1900, the Jews finally found their promised land, and then they got obsessed with this stupid desert in the Middle East. Because the Jews' promised land is here. It's the United States of America.
It's Brooklyn. It's Brooklyn.
It's the United States of America. This is the promised land for the Jews. This is where the Jews do the best. And when handed the promised land, all the Jews can think about, the Jewish leaders, is this patch of desert in the Middle East. It's screw that. The Jews' promised land is here. It's here. You are here. It's
even
here.
More than that. Look, think about this twisted logic. And once again, for the sake of identity, I'm ethnically Jewish as hell. I'm 97.2% Ashkenazi Jew according to 23andMe. All right, so I'm a thoroughbred. I think the rest is Neanderthal. Seriously. So think about this. You're an oppressed people, and most people hate you, and they just tried to kill most of you, right? So what do? You concentrate most of your people in a small plot of land, which is the most vulnerable place and the most coveted on earth, in the interest of protecting your people.
I don't know. I mean, I've told you this before, but I think the Jewish homeland is the United States of America. It's a free country. People can get up and they can do their best and make a lot of money. They're professors and literary artists and
talk about
writers.
Anglo-Saxon values. The Jews, the Jews knock that shit out of the park, right?
I mean, half my friends are Jews. All my lawyers are Jewish, and my accountants are Jewish. I mean, everybody's a Jew. It's like this is your promised land, dude. I mean, and yet every single sort of Jewish organization is obsessed with Zionism. It's
I've written extensively about this. It's like a Harry Potter magic spell. Jews love argument. They love debate. And they love conversation and free thinking. The second you say Israel, most Jews completely lose their mind. Their eyes glaze over, their brain shuts down, their dick gets hard, and all of a sudden they just want to kill Arabs. You know what I mean? It's just amazing to me. And Seth Rogen was on the Mark Maron podcast, and to me this was notable. They both sounded high and they were giggling through half of this. But Seth Rogen was making points that really resonated for me as a fellow American Jew. And he brought up a lot of these points, which is we're putting ourselves in a disadvantaged position by defending the Holy Land. And at what cost and to what end? And he's not being anti-Zionist per se, and he's certainly not being anti-Semitic. He's just using common sense, which is we've created this contentious state, killing millions of people, and there's no solution to it. There's no off ramp. You could be like Mike Huckabee and you're friends with the Jews in Israel to create a landing strip for Jesus for the second coming. But aside from that, I don't see where this is going.
Well, I mean, historically, the answer to this problem in the Middle East is ethnic cleansing, wholesale genocide of the other population.
Yeah.
That's historic. What do you think the Mongols did, right? I mean, this is it. This is the story. Like the Magyars when they took over the Hungarian plains.
Magyars.
Yeah, Magyars. Got it.
Yeah.
I mean, they killed everybody else. Well, they killed all the men. They took the women and the children as slaves, right? But I mean, that's historically what's happened. And but on the other hand, the ultra right Jewish crazies, the ones who build tunnels in New York, those people, they can stay, but the scientists and the engineers and the writers and you guys are all commies to begin with, but that's okay. We can fix you.
Yeah, but
what I mean? It's like
we're commies, but we're flexible. You know what I mean?
I know.
You dangle a tenured professorship or a business opportunity, and all of a sudden we're not commies anymore.
So anyway, I think one of the big failures is Trump, playing bitch to Netanyahu, who I think is a terrible human being. I used to be a big Netanyahu fan, but what I've seen,
he sucks for everybody except Netanyahu.
Yeah, so I think that's one of Trump's main failures.
What about Ukraine? Because there's similarities here, and Trump's been vacillating a lot. I have a feeling about Trump's feeling, which is that Ukraine is an enormous pain in the ass. And if he could, he would just unplug all support and just forget about it. He wants the Peace Prize, and that ship has sailed. So I think it's a mixture of his own personal vanity to solve a problem he really doesn't give a shit about. And I think he's really at the end of the day, why should we support this pimple on the ass of Russia when it's way easier to cozy up to Vladimir for opportunities, global security, and fuck Ukraine? And besides, I got impeached because of that douchebag. That's what I think Trump feels about Ukraine.
Well, I mean, I think, you might be right about Trump. I think the American foreign policy establishment doesn't want Russia to go past the Dnieper. And I think that anything more than that would bring the United States into the war. And the thing about it is that I don't think that message has been quietly and clearly communicated to Putin.
It has not.
I think that, and the Europeans are all, every time there's a potential deal, the Europeans fuck it up. But NATO is very weak. None of the European powers have a military worth a damn, except Turkey. No, that's not true. All of the European powers have competent professional air forces. Even they have a competent.
Even the Swiss have a good air force too.
But as far as armies are concerned, ground troops, which is what you need to take territory, they're all useless. The Finns are excellent, and they have a huge reserve force. And you know what they're really good at? What they're expert at? Defending Finland.
They killed 2.5 million Russians doing that.
But what they can't do is put an expeditionary force in the field in Poland, to take. The U.S. can do it. Maybe there might be 10,000 British troops that are worth a damn. All the rest of the countries are completely useless, and except for Turkey. Now, why is Turkey has a lot of troops? They're all male. They're none of this LGBTQ crap. They all have rifles, and they're all really willing to fight. And they have great esprit de corps. And so it's the U.S., a little bit of Brits, and the Turks are the only ones who have ground troops. And so it's NATO is just a disaster. Now, I do think that the best possible thing would be for Russia to keep whatever it has, get the little last bits of Luhansk and Donetsk, but not to take the rest of Zaporizhia on, because I think.
I mean, the Donbass is a no-brainer. It's predominantly Russian already, and that's just a given. But the other
Ukraine
region
isn't even a country if it doesn't have Odessa. So that's kind of why you got to stay on the other side of the Dnieper. And it would be good to have a neutral rump Ukraine, neutral. Russia controls the eastern half. There's a neutral state in the middle. So we don't have Russian troops against Polish, and American troops, right up front.
Yeah, that's a given. The question is if we could get to this logical and inevitable division point, which is basically convincing Vladimir that he can't have all of Ukraine, which is what the goal has been from the beginning, and convince the Ukrainians that they've got no choice but to give up the Donbass. That's the impasse here, essentially.
Zelensky said, well, he couldn't give up the Donbass. He'd lose his job. Well, he's a dictator, so who cares? Let him lose his job. I think if you look at a map, I think it's important to look at a map. I think the United States and Russia should be friends. Now, this whole Ukraine catastrophe, which is caused entirely by the United States and Britain, by overthrowing the legitimately elected government in 2014, and then before that, trying to invite Ukraine into NATO.
I kind of call bullshit on that, because I think Vlad has been hungry for unifying since he took power at the turn of the millennia. So I call bullshit on that. I think that Vlad has been opportunistic and very lucky with the bad decisions that we have made. So I'm not disagreeing with these bad decisions that were made on our side, but I think it fed into the Putin opportunism and narrative of, Putin looks at a map. Imagine if Texas wanted to secede from the Union, okay? And then imagine that a country on the other side of the planet is pumping hundreds of billions of dollars in Stinger missiles and defense capabilities into Houston and Dallas, okay?
I know, and that's what we did.
I mean, that's how they look at it. That's how Putin looks at this.
Like in 2022, 2023, he came to Bush and said, we'd like to join NATO. And Bush was like, yeah, we got to think about that. And what our current, at that point, the neocon foreign policy establishment was like, no way, Russia's our enemy. But I think, in the future, it's going to take now a generation because things are so fucked up. We really ought to reconcile with Russia. I know Russia is a big country.
100%. I am no argument there.
But the Russians, the Russians are very westernized. I mean, Tchaikovsky and Tolstoy and Dostoevsky, they have a different viewpoint, but St. Petersburg is so beautiful, and the museums and the art and they're very smart, and I'm not big on the Chechens and stuff, but it's the Russians. They should be our friends. They want to be our friends. We should want to be their friends. Yes. And it's just gonna now. We could have been their friends back in 2004, 2005, and this whole thing could have been avoided.
I agree. I agree with you there. But Putin is a disaster. There's no reason.
Not from the Russian perspective.
From a Russian
their GDP per capita has gone up by a factor of 5 under Putin's rule, and that includes the war
from the payola. But there's no reason that instead of having iPhone factories in China, we should have iPhone factories in Russia. Okay, and that kind of integration, that's Putin's fault. Putin created a wedge with the West. And a lot of this adversarial stance comes from Putin's lack of vision.
He is an ethno-nationalist, which again is not the Anglo-Saxon way, right? I told you that before. And he is mad that there are ethnic Russians not in Russia. But he's like he's a Duganist too. Like he's not mad that there are Chechens in Russia and there are Siberians in Russia and there's all these other, little non-Russian people in Russia.
That's because he's an imperialist too. He's like, Russia should dominate the world. It's like, what's holding him back? Nothing.
I'm not a fan of Putin, but like when you look at people we're friends with, like the King of Saudi Arabia and the people in Qatar and this new ISIS or Al Qaeda terrorist in charge of Syria, and you think, okay, in the grand scheme of life, is Putin really that bad?
Meanwhile, we betrayed the Kurds again.
Yeah, I know.
And the Kurds are the closest to our Anglo-Saxon values. They treat women with respect. They allow religious freedom.
Yeah.
They're entrepreneurial.
Yes.
Yeah, they like food
and the
from
weird
everywhere.
Thing is, like, everybody's supposed to have, what does the UN Charter say? Something like, everyone's supposed to have, their own state. I forget exactly the words, but like, well, why isn't there a Kurdistan? Well, because, oh my God, look at all the people who get mad. The Turks get mad, the Syrians get mad, the Iraqis get mad, the Iranians get mad. But like, if any people in the world deserves their own state to run the way they want,
1,000%.
It's the Kurds,
Yeah. And they're cool people too. It's like so that shows the travesty of our continued myopia when it comes to foreign policy. And
Saladin was a badass, right?
Yeah, and it's the vestigial tissue of post-World War II Cold War paranoia and slicing and dicing the world. I mean, what the actual F, right? It's been almost 100 years. So I'm with you. And back to the Ukraine thing, it's like this was I've not that I'm a strategic or tactical genius, but back when the war broke out, a couple months in, I wrote blog posts that you and I think talked about that basically painted this picture of where we're going to be if they don't change their trajectory. Russia clearly had the momentum long term to protract it all the way out. 4 years later,
I got to give the Ukrainians. I got to give the Ukrainians credit because, like, in 3 years, the Red Army went from Stalingrad to Berlin, and in 4 years, the Russian army has advanced maybe 20 kilometers on the front. It's like right. This is not the Red Army. Right.
No. But, I have all due respect to the Ukrainians, just like the Kurds, frankly. But they're right at the wrong place at the wrong time in history. The Ukrainians right now.
It's unfortunate, and with the attacks on the infrastructure, it's a very cold winter, and I've heard that 600,000 people have fled Kiev because there's no heat.
They're freezing their ass off. Right.
I'm not. I'm generally not in favor of attacking civilian targets and war, but like this is a total war now, so like they're going to lose. And I it's very sad because it didn't have to be this way. The Russians offered a peace very early on, and it was rejected by, Boris Yeltsin and the Biden State Department. And the peace was very, very good, especially compared to just now.
Yeah, I call bullshit on that. I think Putin wants all of Ukraine. That's self-evident. All of this machination and I call it the Byzantine clusterfuck, which is you take something that is sliced and diced with Occam's razor, which is the motivation of Vladimir Putin to take all of Ukraine, and then you work it through and assign blame, especially on the part of the receiving end or the victim. I don't buy it. I just think Vlad wants it. Vlad wants Ukraine, and he very well might get it at this rate.
There are so many independent verified accounts of this peace offering, but I'm not going to argue about this.
Which
Let's
would
go to
last, which would last 2 weeks until he regroups and attacks again. So that's what I mean. Maybe this was true, but it's all horseshit anyway. It's very clear what he wants. He wants a unified Russia. He wants Texas reabsorbed into the Union. It's no more complicated.
He said the breakup of the Soviet Union was the greatest catastrophe of the 20th century. He has said.
So that's where he's at, you know. And just speaking of Ukraine, I lived in New York, as you know, for 13 years. I think something like 10% of the power that came out of our light bulb above our living room table where me and the kids would play poker came from refurbished Ukrainian, refurbished uranium, right? they decommissioned their nuclear reactors because Bill Clinton provided a security assurance, and they powered New York, but left them completely vulnerable. So if we're really looking for blame, the Ukrainians should never have given up their nukes,
and we shouldn't have made them.
Right.
Okay, so I think we got to go. It's getting late. We got to go with like the
I just want to summarize and put a capper on this. Let's quickly in 2 minutes go through the list because
I want. There's one more catastrophe, complete failure, and that is Pam Bondi and Kash Patel. They are absolutely the worst. I think they should be fired immediately. The whole Epstein files catastrophe. It's just so embarrassing. The fact that, you know, in the first year after the January 6, 2021 riots, the Justice Department prosecuted 725 people. I think the deep state operatives who have, I think there's been a handful of arrests, not even a handful, like 3 or 4 of people who were responsible for the corruption at the Justice Department, the corruption at the FBI in the and they're embarrassments. And they were the worst 2 people to pick. Kash Patel flying his private jet to go see his girlfriend sing the national anthem.
But hold on a second, Ed. It's like Bondi and Patel basically do what the Donald asks for, don't they?
Obviously not. Because the Donald keeps asking for things.
I mean, if you look at the Epstein files, the Donald doesn't want to incriminate his friends. And he said he gave Pam a call and he said, no Epstein files, right?
And look at what they're doing. The Congress finally passed a law and Trump signed it saying all of the Epstein files should be released except for the names of the underage victims. And they're putting out these documents, 200-page documents with everything redacted. They're violating the law. I think they should be impeached.
Ed, why are they doing that? Because
they're criminals.
No, because your boy, the Donald, told them to. Fuck out of here. Here, I think you're really smoking the MAGA mojo.
I think I honestly do think Trump is focused almost entirely on the economy and foreign policy.
No, I think Donnie can multitask. Remember about Laura and the state? Donnie has no trouble multitasking here, and what Donnie wants, Donnie gets, especially when it comes to the DOJ and DHS.
Yeah, well, he did
FBI
get ICE.
And FBI.
Yeah.
We haven't even talked about the ICE situation and National Guard.
Yeah, well, the Supreme Court ruled he couldn't use the National Guard unless he's run out of military, for regular military, and he has to invoke the Insurrection Act to use the military. Now, I made a comment on your latest TikTok where you were extolling the virtues of Alexander Hamilton, but in fact, Alexander Hamilton led an army against tax protesters in Pennsylvania. And if he were alive today, he would lead the regular army into Minnesota, and he would give the protesters military tribunal type trials. So I'm totally in favor of Alexander Hamilton.
I highly.
You got to read about the Whiskey Rebellion. I mean, it's just amazing.
I just don't think so. I think Al would have been like, "What are you guys doing?"
No, you don't know. You don't know. You're thinking of the musical Hamilton. I'm thinking about the real.
No, I'm thinking of the Hamilton who liked, federal authority, but this unitary executive bullshit. I think they would have.
Wait! What are you kidding about? that George Washington was as unitary a unitary executive as we've ever had.
I understand that, but we were just getting started.
Washington, Lincoln, FDR, they were all unitary executives. This whole thing of the non-unitary executive, that's a product of the hippies in the 60s.
Anyway, real fast, we got border A. We both agree.
From my view, yeah.
Economy, I give them a C, you give them an A.
I give them a B plus or something.
B plus. Foreign policy, I give them like a B plus. What about you?
B minus. The Israel thing bugs me.
I give Trump higher creds on foreign policy.
I'm sorry that being Netanyahu's bitch is just sticks in my craw. So B minus, C plus.
I think I gave him an extra boost because of Maduro. I think that took balls, and it was probably a good thing overall.
And it does tell, and we could bomb underground nuclear weapons facilities in Iran, even though Iran has the most sophisticated Soviet or Russian air defense systems. Now, the Israelis helped, of course.
They took those out, Ed, before they went, and the B2s had an open playing field.
Yeah, I know, but they put like 2 bombs right on top of each other.
One right on top of the other.
They dropped 6 bombs in their 3 holes. It's unreal. Unreal. No, it's fantastic.
That also reminds me of my high school girlfriend.
Again, a lot of these are good, but they're also warnings to Russia, I think, and to China. So that's also good.
I think we live in interesting times. I want to thank you for your opinion, because I think healthy conversations like this are overlooked and necessary. And listeners on either side will disagree with you, with me, with both of us. But it's a shit show out there of instantaneous decision making, knee-jerk reactions, total bias, and just this idiotic tribalism where no one looks at the issues. No one's thinking strategically. It's a visceral sporting match. It's like your side or my side, and it's too bad. That's why we suck.
I think we had a lot more agreement than we had disagreement. I think, we both agree that Trump is a bull in the china shop, and to a certain extent, part of that is good. But on the other hand, it's sort of can be negatively disruptive, as well as ruining personal relationships, which, diplomacy requires these sort of a little bit of bullshit in the personal relationships. You know what I mean? So it
requires a lot. A lot.
Yeah. Actually. So the bombast often hurts and does not help. I do think that it's in the FBI and DOJ that we're really let down. I think, and I'd like to see more Doge, but overall,
another quote is like, "I'm not opposed to." What was that? I'm not opposed.
I'm not in favor of genocide.
Right? I'm not in favor of genocide, and we could use more Doge.
and I guess I gave him a B plus. I came into yesterday's research thinking I would give him a C minus, because all I see is like the bad stuff, and I don't realize that underneath that the personnel he's appointed to most of these positions are doing really good work. We didn't talk about rooting out DEI, which is fantastic. I mean, I just can't say enough about like eliminating DEI.
I think that was just misconstrued angle. Yeah, I'm a Coleman Hughes fan, if you know him from Free Press, and and then John McWhorter as well from Columbia. I'm a big fan of both those guys, and both those guys are brothers, and both those guys are smart, and both those guys see through the veneer of identity politics and the mess we got ourselves into in a way that backfires on the very minorities that these policies are meant to protect. So,
one of the other things, speaking of good things, apparently, and I didn't know this, that drug overdose deaths are down 20 to 25% from the last Biden year, and the fentanyl deaths are down even further, where between 30 and 35. So the border thing is really having an effect on, this horrible,
I think that that's right. Once you secure your border, there's going to be a cascade of benefits throughout your society, especially when it regards contraband, dangerous drugs, and just fucked up shit.
So, I think there's a lot of pluses in here, and that's why I give him a B plus. If you read the news, of course, he gets a D minus or an F. If you read the MAGA Twitter, he's like a god who can do no wrong.
I'm at my Trump 2.0 overall from my bald-headed, mostly libertarian perspective is about a C. I think like a C. Maybe in certain areas it's like an A, like we're saying, but just like with RFK Jr., who's like A plus, F minus, for me, Trump is kind of like an AD. So man, what does that add like a C, C plus average?
I hear you. I mean, I do hear you, and I if you can just abstract away from the aesthetics and from some of the early regime uncertainty that is pretty much gone now. Biden stopped. There was in Trump one. There was reforms of the VA, so it allowed veterans to go to private doctors like you and I do, and the VA pay for it. And Biden stopped all that, and the lines for appointments for veterans just went through the roof. And Trump's director of VA changed all that, and now there's no lines. Like according to, again, what I've read was like you can get appointments now. You know what I mean? Because a lot of people go to the private doctors, they get reimbursed, and the ones who need VA hospitals can get in. You know what I mean? So just our veterans. It's like people have sacrificed their limbs or risked their lives and limbs for this country. They were just
one thing I'd like to cap us with, which is the Freakonomics perspective of headlines. And I think this resonates for everything we're talking about vis-a-vis Trump. The train derailment in Spain that happened recently? About 24 people died, right? 36, maybe about 40 people died, and about 100 or so were wounded, maybe more. So I went to my chatty bro, OpenAI here, right? I go, hey, chatty bro, what's the average rate of traffic fatalities in the country of Spain per day? And he goes, and he goes, hey, Mookie, the average rate is three deaths, not causing injuries, 3 dead people per day in Spain when it comes to just traffic accidents, okay? So they have 2 days of mourning in Spain for 40 deaths, and you get 40 deaths in about every 2 weeks at least. You get every 2 weeks, 40 people die in Spain. No one gives a shit. And then you have this train derailment, which is a big news flash, and everyone is in woeful mourning. I mean, I feel bad for the 40 people who got wasted, but what about the more than 1,000 people wasted every year on the roads? No one cares. How many medical accidents do we have here in the States?
Hundreds
of thousands of dead people because doctors, you can't read their handwriting. They get the wrong medicine, or somebody gets the wrong organ removed during surgery. So this idea of our conception of things through headlines and the reality of what's going on are like night and day. And I bring it up in this podcast because we're talking about the Donald. And I think that this is an expression of that.
He is sort of the biggest thing that happened in American history for a while. I mean, obviously Obama was big, Reagan was big, but he is sort of such an outsized personality, sense of humor.
100%. We don't know what to do with this guy. Yeah. And we get blinded by his bullshit in ways that he actually intends. So there's method behind the madness. And the one thing that drives me nuts is how the left always thinks Trump is nuts. I don't think he's nuts at all. I think that he's very measured, and he knows he's very strategic. And he does indulge himself with his own narcissism, and he does flare. He's like an ADHD guy who flares. So
Right.
there is some kind of zaniness to it, but he knows exactly what he's doing. He's got a global view and he's consistent with it.
It's weird how few opponents have ever read Art of the Deal, right? I mean, it's
Yeah.
like it's what do you expect, right? He's behaving
Yeah.
exactly like, I mean, he didn't write it, but he's behaving exactly like that.
The sensibility is there. In the Art of the Deal, he talks about he's got a landlord in one of his building, and he knows he's getting ripped off, and he knows his landlord is stealing about 120 grand a year, but he keeps the landlord there because he's a hard ass. He pounds on doors. He keeps the colored out. You know what I mean? So the whole attitude, Trump's like he's realpolitik when it came to real estate. And now that he's commander of the free world, it's the same rules, which is Vladimir, yeah, he defenestrates journalists and opponents. But it's like the landlord who's ripping off Trump by 120K a year. He knows he makes 3 times that in rents that are collected.
I think there's a story, I don't know whether it's true or not, you never can tell, but he was contracted to build like this bridge or walking bridge or something like that. And one of the usual anti-development groups, was going to file a lawsuit to get a restraining order to have him stop it. And so he got his people together and said, well, it's Friday afternoon. The court's not open until Monday morning. Can we do this entire project in 2 days? And they said, yeah, we can do it. And then he did it. And that's snatching Maduro, right? That is snatching Maduro. That is what it is. It's like if we don't do it now, do it well, then.
And even better, he might not have even finished it, or he might have faked half of it. It doesn't matter.
I don't even know whether the story is true, but it's definitely it could be true.
And talking about perception, just to cap it, look at the administration he's dovetailing off of. Biden literally was an infirmed senior citizen. He could barely walk, and he had the nuclear codes, a few feet from him all the time. And the Democrats were in denial. They were asking us to lie to our own senses, and he was pretty much MIA. And Trump is, for an 80-year-old mofo, he's unbelievably active and engaged on all issues all the time. And he's flooding the zone, not only for a strategic benefit, like it's overwhelming and it takes, SCOTUS a year to react to what he's doing, but it's because it expresses leadership that's actively engaged. And human beings respond to that, which is not to compare him to Mussolini, but Mussolini used to keep the light on in his bedroom. So people would think that he's busy working for the people. And meanwhile, he'd be downstairs in the garage high-fiving the chauffeurs and talking about pussy. You know what I mean? Everyone loves that kind of leader with energy and finesse and gusto, and he's always doing something. You feel, even if you categorically disagree with this guy and you think he's an asshole, he's doing stuff. He's engaged.
He's a man with a plan. It doesn't always come off.
Right.
He does. I think a lot of things have improved. So that's why I'm giving it a B+.
Yeah. Well, thanks for your time, Ed, your point of view. We agree to disagree on some fundamental things, but we're talking, and it's joyful to engage in smart conversation with, the stakes being this high, and do it in a fun kind of way where we both leave the conversation with a smile.
It is funny. Like I know a number of people who are not in favor of Trump, and they just cannot have this kind of conversation at all. Yeah. It's just absolutely not possible. They're so emotionally involved in TDS, that they can't do it. One of the things I really appreciate about you is that no matter whether we agree or disagree, we can always have a civil conversation about it.
Yeah, and have a good time with it. And then we could talk about science too. We need to do another science one, especially with the state of cosmology. Like, what's going on? When did the universe really start?
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Take care. Thank you.
Thank you very much.